St. Agnes Academy wasn't like other schools. Hidden deep in the foggy woods on the edge of town, the old building stood like a ghost from another time. It had once been a famous boarding school, but 50 years ago, strange and tragic events claimed the lives of several students. After that, the school shut down. Over time, the terrifying stories of St. Agnes faded into whispers, forgotten by most. But now, after all those years, St. Agnes was reopening. The town needed a school for its growing population, and they didn't have the money to build a new one. Despite its age, St. Agnes was still standing strong, though its walls showed the signs of wear and neglect. Parents eager to have a school chose to ignore the old rumors. Most of them had never stepped foot inside the school. They hadn't felt the cold, heavy air that lingered even during summer. Sophie Langston was new to town and didn't know the history of St. Agnes when she walked through its gates for the first time. As a transfer student, she thought it was just another school, just another place to deal with. But on her first day, she noticed the strange looks from the locals, the way people avoided looking directly at the school. Sophie, who was always practical, brushed it off as small-town weirdness. She would come to regret that. On that first day, Sophie met 3 other students who would become her friends: Kara, a quiet girl with intense eyes; David, a skeptic who found the reopening of the school lovable; and Greg, who didn't seem to care about anything except getting through the year. They all sat together in homeroom, the sun filtering through the stained glass windows, casting colorful but unsettling patterns on the floor. That was when the strange events began. Mrs. Calloway, their homeroom teacher, was calling the roll when the lights flickered. At first it was just a quick dimming, but then they went out completely, leaving the room in the eerie glow of the stained glass. A low humming sound filled the air, growing louder until the lights snapped back on. Everyone froze. The room felt different, heavier, like something had just woken up. Mrs. Calloway awkwardly cleared her throat and continued the roll call. Sophie glanced at her friends and noticed their nervous faces. The school was old, sure, but this felt like more than just an electrical problem. Still, no one said anything. By lunchtime, the incident was already fading from their minds. But stranger things kept happening. At first it was little things: books falling from shelves, doors creaking open by themselves. Then there was the stairwell leading to the basement. Everyone started avoiding it. It was different from the rest of the school, colder, darker. The shadows seemed to move in ways that didn't feel right. As the weeks passed, Sophie began having nightmares. She dreamed of the old school, its hallways stretching endlessly, voices calling to her from the walls. In her dreams, she saw faces twisted and distorted pressing against the windows, silently begging to be let in. She would wake up every night in a cold sweat, heart pounding. One afternoon, while sitting in the nearly empty cafeteria, Kara broke the silence. "Have any of you noticed something about this place?" she asked quietly. David laughed. "You mean the ghost stories? Come on, that's just a bunch of old nonsense." "I'm serious," Kara whispered, leaning in closer. "I've been hearing things, and last night I saw something in the hallway, outside my room. It wasn't there when I looked again." Sophie shivered. "I've been having nightmares," she admitted. Greg, who had been scrolling through his phone, finally spoke. "Maybe we're just letting this place get to us. It's creepy, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's haunted." But they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, Sophie was jolted awake by a loud thudding sound. Her heart raced as she sat up in bed, listening. The thudding grew louder, as if someone or something was banging on the walls. It was coming from the direction of the basement. Despite her fear, Sophie felt compelled to follow the sound. She grabbed her phone and quietly slipped out of bed, moving through the dark hallways. The closer she got to the basement, the colder the air became. She could see her breath in front of her, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. But at the top of the basement stairs, she hesitated, peering down into the blackness. The sound had stopped. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. Her heart pounded as she spun around, but there was no one there, just the empty hallway. Sophie swallowed her fear and turned back to the stairs. Something inside her urged her to go down. The basement was worse than she had imagined. The air was thick and heavy, the walls stained with strange, rust-colored marks. The floor felt sticky under her feet, as if the ground itself was trying to trap her. Sophie's phone light flickered as she scanned the room. Then she saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the shadows. At first it looked like a person, but as her light moved closer, she saw its face pale, almost see-through, with deep, hollow eyes. Its mouth was stretched into a horrible grin, its teeth black and jagged. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped forward. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, and its bony fingers reached out toward her. Sophie stumbled back, her flashlight flickering as the battery drained quickly. Just when the figure was about to touch her, a loud scream echoed through the halls. Sophie whipped around, but the scream wasn't hers. It came from everywhere, vibrating through the walls and floor, shaking the school itself. Sophie didn't wait. She turned and ran, her legs moving as fast as they could. The basement pulsed with energy behind her, the walls twisting and bending as if they were alive, trying to trap her inside. By the time she reached her dorm room, she was gasping for air, her chest tight with fear. The figure, the sounds, the scream, it felt too real to be just a dream. The next morning, Sophie told her friends what had happened. Kara wasn't surprised. She admitted that she had felt drawn to the basement too. David, the skeptic, looked uneasy for the first time, and Greg, usually so laid back, was pale and quiet. It wasn't long before other students started experiencing the same things. They heard the thudding at night, felt the cold spots in the hallways, and saw figures out of the corner of their eyes. One by one, the students began disappearing, swallowed up by the school itself. Their screams echoed through the halls long after they were gone, a chilling reminder that St. Agnes would never let them go. As time passed, Sophie and her friends tried to piece together the history of St. Agnes, desperate to understand what was happening. They searched the library, uncovering old newspaper clippings and records about the school's dark past. In the 1960s, a student named Eleanor was rumored to have gone missing in the basement, never to be found. The few who dared speak of it claimed she was lured there by the spirits of the old building. Others mentioned that most students disappeared after Eleanor, all in mysterious ways. One afternoon, as they were digging through old archives, Kara found a disturbing photograph. It was a faded black and white image of St. Agnes from its early years, long before it closed down. In the background, standing in the shadows near the basement entrance, was a figure pale, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. It looked just like the figure Sophie had seen. "That's her," Sophie whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "That's the thing in the basement." David shook his head, his skepticism crumbling. "It can't be. How could that be in an old photo?" Greg, who had grown quieter since their experiences, stared at the photo. "We need to get out of here. Something's wrong with this place." But St. Agnes wouldn't let them go that easily. That night, Sophie woke again to the sound of thudding. This time it was louder, more insistent. Her heart pounded as she sat up, knowing she couldn't ignore it. The pull toward the basement was stronger than ever. She crept through the darkened halls, feeling the cold air wrap around her like a shroud. The school felt alive now, every creak and groan echoing as if it were breathing. When she reached the basement stairs, she hesitated, but she couldn't turn back. Something was calling her. The basement was darker than before, the air thick with the smell of decay. As Sophie stepped inside, her phone's light flickered once, then went out, leaving her in total darkness. Panic surged through her, but she couldn't move. She could feel the figure watching her, its presence filling the room. Then, out of the silence, a voice whispered her name. Sophie turned, her eyes wide, but she saw nothing. The voice came again, louder this time, echoing through the empty space. She ran, but as she did, the walls seemed to close in, twisting and warping, the building itself trying to trap her. Behind her, the sound of footsteps followed, the figure drawing closer. Just as she reached the stairwell, a hand brushed her shoulder. Sophie screamed and bolted up the stairs, bursting out into the hallway. But when she looked back, there was no one there, just the empty, silent school. The next morning, Sophie knew what they had to do. "We need to leave this place." Now, she told Kara, David, and Greg. They agreed, their faces pale with fear. But as they tried to leave, the doors wouldn't open. The windows were sealed, the walls stretching and contorting like a living nightmare. St. Agnes had woken, and it wasn't going to let them go. Not now, not ever. The Explorer signing off.